Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Alive, and this next video is going to be on Warlock PvE, dungeons, and raiding. Anyways, let's get right into it. Warlocks are a DPS class that also bring utility to raid. They can do crowd controlling effects such as fear or banish when you're in a tight spot. Or they can amplify damage on a target by applying a curse to it, such as Curse of Elements, Curse of Shadows, or Curse of Recklessness. Becoming a good PvE Warlock doesn't really start when you reach level 60. It starts when you first create your character and choose your race. For both Alliance and Horde, there are two races that can be Warlocks, and one of them is typically better than the other race. Here's a chart of the base stats of every single race in vanilla World of Warcraft. On Alliance, you can see that the Gnome has 4 more intellect than the human does, but has 1 less spirit than human does. Typically, spirit isn't really a stat that makes much of a difference for Warlocks. However, intellect is. It increases your mana pool and increases your chance to get a critical strike. These differences in base stats are very minor, however. The real significance between the two classes comes in their racials. Gnome has a racial called Expansive Mind. Expansive Mind gives you 5% of all the intellect that you have on your character. At the start of the game, this isn't that much bonus intellect, but once you get further into the game and acquire raiding gear, this 5% intellect starts to go up and up in value. Not only does the Gnome have Expansive Mind, but it also has Escape Artist. Escape Artist is probably one of the most useful PvP racials in the game. But aside from PvP, there's a few spots in raiding where you can actually use Escape Artist to your benefit. Human racials for Warlock are slightly worse than Gnome racials. Humans gain the Human Spirit, which is 5% more spirit instead of intellect like Gnome. But again, spirit is not so useful for Warlock. Other than the Human Spirit, they do have some other significant racials, but this is more benefiting towards melee, not caster. On Horde side, the two races that can be Warlock are Orc and Undead. Typically for PvE, Undead is the most favorable race. Undead only has 1 more intellect than orcs do, and 2 more spirit. But again, these base stats aren't really that significant. What really matters here is the racials once again. Undead have a racial called Will of Forsaken that most of you are probably familiar with. There's a lot of bosses in dungeons and primarily in raids that have AoE fear effects. And if you ever get hit by one of these AoE fear effects or they're totally unavoidable, you're going to be able to break it immediately, while all the other casters that are not undead are going to be running around and losing damage. Orc racials are also beneficial to raiding. The two racials that are beneficial towards a Warlock in raid scenarios are Command, which increases your Warlock pet's damage by 5%, and also increased stun resist. Typically, Command is not so important, as most times Warlocks are not raiding with their pets out, making this talent point not so useful. On the other hand, having stun resist is quite useful, but most times that you can get stunned, the stuns are also avoidable, making this talent good, but not great if you're actually playing the game well. Now that we've discussed races, let's move on to the different talent trees that you can use for raiding. These talent trees are commonly known as DS Ruin for Demonic Sacrifice Ruin, or SM Ruin for Shadow Mastery Ruin. Demonic Sacrifice is an ability that's 21 points down into the Demonology tree. This ability will give you a special buff depending on which one of your demons you summon and sacrifice. The demon that we're going to sacrifice for raiding is the Succubus. When you Demonic Sacrifice the Succubus, you get 15% more shadow damage. The other notifiable talent in these raiding specs is Ruin. Ruin is 21 points down in the Destruction tree. This talent allows your critical strengths to deal 100% more damage, allowing big crits on your shadow bolts. As a little tip, not only is Demonic Sacrifice buffing your damage on your Shadow Bolt, Corruption, or other shadow spells, but the damage you deal to yourself with Life Tap is also shadow damage. Who knew? So when you have this Demonic Sacrifice buff for 15% more shadow damage, you actually Life Tap for 15% more mana as well. The SM Ruin spec, or Shadow Mastery Ruin spec, has the same 21 points in destruction as the Demonic Sacrifice spec. However, it completely neglects the demonology tree, putting 30 points into Affliction. When you put 30 points into your Affliction tree, you're gaining 5 out of 5 Shadow Mastery, what the spec is named after. Shadow Mastery is an ability that increases your damage by shadow spells by 10%, while also increasing your healing from spells by 10%. Other notifiable talents in this talent tree are Nightfall and Amplify Curse. Nightfall is an ability where every single time your corruption deals damage has a 4% chance to make your next Shadow Bolt cast instant. Amplify Curse is a 3-minute cooldown that increases the effectiveness of your next Curse of Agony by 50%, Curse of Weakness by 50%, or Curse of Exhaustion by 20%. Typically, the Shadow Mastery build does slightly less damage than the Demonic Sacrifice build. The reason people go Shadow Mastery is not only is it more viable in PvP if you want to do PvP while raiding and don't want to respec, but the main reason it's good is because with this spec, you can actually have a pet out. And the pet that you're going to want to have out is the Imp for Blood Pact. Blood Pact is an ability that increases the stamina of everyone in your party by 38. Typically, you'll have one Shadow Mastery Ruin Warlock in your raid party that's going to be in the Tanks group to increase the tank HP. Shadow Mastery Ruin is not strictly worse than Demonic Sacrifice. They both fill a certain niche. In single target scenarios, Demonic Sacrifice is going to be a little bit better. However, for clearing trash or fights where you can multi-dot, Shadow Mastery is going to take the reign over, and that's because you have multiple chances to proc Nightfall and get those free Shadow Bolts. There's a wide variety of consumables in vanilla World of Warcraft, ranging from jujus in Winterspring, elixirs, potions, flasks, food, you name it. These consumables typically are either damage increasing or defensive survivability increasing. Some of the essentials that a Warlock is going to want to bring to raid for damage are Flask of Supreme Power, increases your spell power by 150 for 2 hours. Greater Arcane Elixir, increases spell damage by up to 35 for 1 hour. Elixir of Shadow Power, increases shadow damage by up to 40 for 30 minutes. Now, the defensive consumables, while damage is good, tend to be a little bit more important. There are multiple different protection potions that you use for various different raids, such as Greater Fire Protection Potion for Molten Core, or Greater Nature Protection Potion for Encourage. These are all very important to bring to your raids. However, as a Warlock, your best friend in the game is going to be a potion called Limited Invulnerability Potion. This potion has a 2-minute cooldown and makes you immune to all physical damage for the next 6 seconds. Warlocks in Classic WoW have no way of reducing their threat, no talent points, nothing. The only thing you can do is get Salvation from a Paladin if you're on Alliance, or Tranquil Air Totem from Shamans on Horde. If you don't have any of these, you're gonna pull threat right away. Even if you do have one of these, you still might pull threat from your tanks. So you're going to need these potions in your bags at all times. In the WoW of today, choosing your professions don't really make a huge impact on your gameplay. However, professions in Classic WoW mean everything. The recommended professions that a typical Warlock is going to want to go for their maximum damage output is Engineering and Tailoring. And while you don't have to use these professions, you can do decent damage without them. The Warlocks that have Engineering are always going to have a slight edge over the ones that don't. For Tailoring, there's some best-in-slot pieces that can only be crafted, or there's some bonuses that you can get only if you have Tailoring. For example, early on in the game, the best robe a Warlock can use is an epic robe from Sholomance called Robe of the Void, and you can only make this robe. It's BOP. That means you have to have Tailoring to craft it, maxed Tailoring. Not only is there Robe of the Void, but When Zul'Gurub is released, all Warlocks are going to want to get a set called the Bloodvine set. It gives you a ton of hit rating, exactly what Warlocks are looking for. Trust me, you'll find out what I mean. The Bloodvine set, while you can actually wear it without tailoring, unlike the Robe of the Void, there's a special bonus on it. If you wear all 3 pieces of Bloodvine, and if you have maxed out tailoring, only if you have tailoring, you get an extra 2% crit, which in vanilla matters. Unlike tailoring, engineering doesn't really give you a pre-bis item or something special for gear like that. It's more so used for the trinkets and odds and ends that it can craft for you. There are trinkets called ultra safe transporters, one for Gadgetzan and one for Winterspring. You get to choose which one you want. These help you get to raids a lot faster and just move around in the world a lot faster. Especially if you're Alliance, because you're not based out of Kalimdor, you're based out of Eastern Kingdoms. So it takes you to that continent without you having to wait for a boat. Aside from the cool stuff that you can craft with engineering, like that teleporting trinket, there is actually something that's extremely important to world PvP and raiding. This is called a Goblin Sapper Charge. The Goblin Sapper Charge is an item that uses instantly. It immediately goes off, and when it explodes in an AoE circle around you, dealing 600 fire damage to all nearby enemies and 500 to you. You may say, well, why is this good? I'm losing 500 and doing 600. I'm only gaining 100 damage. Well, in PvP situations where a lot of people are stacked up, you can use this item to do that damage to 5 or more targets. And the same goes for raiding. There's many times in raids where you're going to have a bunch of adds stacked on top of each other, or a bunch of Bone Reavers on Nefarian come up and you do a Sapper Charge for an extra 35,000 damage. It makes raiding a lot easier, and it makes clearing trash a lot easier if everyone in the raid has these Goblin Sapper Charges. Now let's talk about the actual playstyle of a Warlock for a little bit. Warlocks don't have anything in their talent tree that increases their overall hit rating, or hit rating for their main damaging spell, Shadow Bolt. The only thing that they have relative to hit in their talent tree is a talent called Suppression, and it does give you up to 10% hit rating, but only on your affliction spells for Corruption or your curses. While this is good, it doesn't add much damage to your single target boss scenario. You'll find yourself as a Warlock missing maybe 2-3 times in a row. However, Warlocks are capable of having huge crits. Many of the debuffs that increase the damage of Warlocks are percentage debuffs, meaning if you have all of them, your Shadow Bolts can go from 3, 4, 5, even 6,000 damage if you have a lot of gear. Some of these debuffs that increase the damage done are Nightfall Axe. Increases spell damage taken by the target by 15% for 5 seconds. It's pretty common that you might have healers or off tanks or someone in the raid swinging this axe and trying to get the debuff up for all of your casters. The next is simply Curse of Shadows that the Warlock puts up. It increases damage taken by Shadow and Arcane by 10%, while also reducing the resistances of the boss by 75. Third, Shadow Weaving. This is a debuff that a Shadow Priest can stack up on the boss. Shadow Weaving increases the shadow damage done to the target by 3%, stacking up to 5 times, so 15%. Last is another thing that the Warlock does himself. It's just called Improved Shadow Bolt in the Destruction Tree. Whenever you crit with a Shadow Bolt, or any other Warlock in your group crits with a Shadow Bolt, then you have a debuff saying, the next 4 shadow damage spells that hit this target do 20% more damage. So when you add all these debuffs together, the Warlock's doing 60% more shadow damage. This makes Warlock gameplay a little volatile early game while you have no hit rating. Sometimes you can get lucky and you crit a boss 5 times in a row and you do a bunch of damage. But at the same time, there's gonna be times where you miss 3 Shadow Bolts in a row, and then you hit 1, and then you miss 2 in a row. However, going into the late game, when you get more hit rating, this smooths out quite a bit. Okay, so What do I do as a Warlock in a single target scenario? What do I do to maximize my DPS? Well, it's pretty simple. You just cast Shadow Bolt. However, if your raid allows you to use Corruption as one of the 16 debuff slots, then you also want to keep Corruption up, and you do not want to clip it, which means you don't want to apply your next Corruption before the first one's falled off. Other than that, you fill the rest of the time with Shadow Bolts and life taps to keep your mana going. There is a spell that you can fill in with from time to time called Shadow Burn in the Destruction tree. This is an instant cast spell, however, so it doesn't scale very well with spell power. Therefore, you don't really want to spam it off cooldown every time. Typically, you want to end the boss fight with this. You want to cast your last Shadow Bolt, run at him, bang, Shadow Burn, end the fight. Or, the other time that you can use this is when you have multiple amplifying debuffs, like I talked about previously. If you have 3 of these debuffs up, then the ability is good to use, such as Curse of Shadows, Shadow Weaving, Improved Shadow Bolt, go for it. Or if Night falls up, or if you're lucky and your priest friend uses Power Infusion on you. AoEing is a bit more simple on a Warlock. Your best AoE spell that you can cast on a Warlock is Hellfire, not Rain of Fire. Hellfire will do a lot more damage over the time that it channels than Rain of Fire will. Many players will multi-dot every single target and then Hellfire. That takes far too many globals when you do this. Typically, if you spend this many globals, the mobs will be dead when there's about 50% of your dots still remaining, making it not so efficient. So I'd recommend, when you're moving into Hellfire, cast Corruptions, as many as you can get off. But when you're in Hellfire and you feel safe to start using it, just start using it, unless there's less than 3 targets. To wrap up playing a Warlock in Classic WoW, I can say that the Warlock has a huge array of abilities. It's pretty easy to just play, but it's very difficult to master because of these reasons. Warlocks in Classic WoW are basically ticking time bombs. They get explosively better with gear. If you want to play a Warlock, you may have some dicey situations early game, and you might not do that much damage compared to the other classes. But remember, in the late game, you become the shadowy master that you were born to be. Well, that's the end of this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll leave a link to my Wowhead guide down below, as well as my Discord link. I hope you join my Discord and ask as many and all questions as you want. If you felt like this video helped out, go ahead and toss a like. If you want more classic content, feel free to subscribe by hitting the bell icon. And above all, let's keep the classic WoW hype alive!